Now we move on to our second keynote talk, again from my dear friend and colleague, Dr. James Intriligator, Vice President, IFNTF USA. His keynote talk will be on ChatGPT for transversal design, from research to grants to classes to programs to products, and there should be more, right, James? Well, James is the professor of the practice and the director of strategic innovation, Department of Mechanical Engineering, Tufts University, Boston, USA. James earned his PhD degree in cognitive neuroscience at Harvard, completed a postdoc in neurology, and worked in industry for 4 years. And then the itch to get back to teaching again was stronger, I guess. So he moved to, the Bangor University in Wales and taught there for 13 years. James was awarded the UK National Teaching Fellow in 2014. And in 2016, he moved back to Boston to Tufts University as director of their Human Factors Engineering program. He's the author of over 50 publications in fields as diverse as neuroscience, neurology, consumer psychology, physics, and literary criticism. His latest work focuses on developing transversal design. His design philosophy, approach, methods, and tools, including AI. And may I add that James recently wrote an article in the conversation on ChatGPT. No, ChatGPT and James have a love relationship. James loves ChatGPT and ChatGPT loves him back. So this article was picked up by the Fortune, the Fast Company, and Geeks Are Sexy, and it has hit over 35,000 reads. So it's my great pleasure to have James give his keynote talk. Welcome, James.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was very kind. Thanks, Srini. So let me just get this image up. There we go. I assume people can see that. Yeah, let's see. So as is often the case, I'm going to have way too many slides. So I'm just going to go fast. I hope that's okay with everyone. And you probably recognize all the words in my title here, except for the word transversal design. So I'm going to begin actually by talking a little bit about what transversal design is. And I'll start with what I often do in some of my design classes. I ask the students to think about how would you go about designing the perfect mug? And pretty quickly, happily, they come to realize that that's kind of an ill-formed question because it depends who the mug is for, who's the user, who's the customer. It's kind of user-centered design for those in computer science world or HCI world. So yeah, who's the customer? Who are you making it for? For whom are you making it? What are they going to do with it? So it's going to be a very different mug if it's for someone who's climbing Everest versus someone who wants to have some tea on a cold winter evening. And yeah, what parameters are you going to design it within? So for instance, are you interested in sustainability, or do you want something that was handmade by local artists, things like that, right? There's all kinds of different dimensions that come into play as you're trying to design something. And so to do that kind of work, you need to use lots of empathy. There's lots of techniques from engineering, psychology, marketing, all of those things will come into play. And the way I like to think of this is that you're sort of gliding through this infinite space with every mug possible, right? So there's in that mug space, there's all kinds of different shape mugs, size mugs, colors, textures, materials, all those kinds of things. You can find any mug you want in this infinite space of all mugs. It's kind of not that interesting because it's sort of obvious in some ways. And that's actually how I do think of design in the broadest terms, that it's really just about navigating what I call constraint and opportunity spaces. So whether you're designing a medical device like that bone saw on the left, or designing an architectural artifact like a house or landscape gardening, in all those cases, it's going to be the same thing. The designer is going to be moving through these constraints and opportunities, right? Depending on the materials they're using, they may have new opportunities opening up, for instance. So that's how I like to think of it. That's kind of what I call transversal design, is the idea that you can design by cutting across all of these different spaces. So in the mug case, you might care about shape space, size space, color space. That's all great. But then you also may care about material space, emotions. What emotional reactions would you like to evoke in your user? Brands, even if you're working for a company. I do a lot of work for brands out there. And there, of course, there's a whole set of other constraints and opportunities that they're trying to maximize. And things like costs, what's the distribution possibilities? How can we source this? etc. DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. All of these different factors will come into play. The last one there is for the business people out there, PESTEL, the political, economic, societal, technical, legal, and environmental constraints that might also come into play. So there's lots of different spaces that you have to move through. And again, back to the simple case of the mug, you think I like to think of this as just being able to glide through these infinite spaces and say, okay, so you do care about, let's say, social justice issues. So let's put a logo on there that celebrates some social justice initiative, right? Or you care about the materials. Let's see if we could source something that's more sustainable. Right, so you can always choose as the designer which spaces you want to explore and which ones you're going to give more weight to. So, of course, that leaves the designer a bit lost in a sense because there's just an infinite number of mugs out there. And so over the last, I guess it's been now 10, 15 years, I've been developing a whole bunch of different methods. Top one there, design thinking is not my method, but the other ones are methods that I've been designing and publishing over the last couple of years. And they're all tools, methods, approaches, ways of thinking that will help the designer identify relevant dimensions and play within them, if you will. And so that's how I was going along, doing my little thing, teaching students, everything was fine. And then a year and a couple of days ago, along comes ChatGPT and DALL-E and all the other generative AI things out there. And as soon as they came out, I started to realize that, wow, this is pretty cool. These are the tools that will let anyone do transversal design effortlessly. And once you kind of understand that, and once you understand sort of how you can use ChatGPT, I think that's the one I'm going to mostly stick to today, it kind of changes everything about the way you work, I hope. And so, as Srini mentioned, I did have this article that came out. Actually, now it's been read 52,000 times. It's gone up a lot in the last little while. But yeah, so if you're interested in reading a bit more about it, you can check out that article of mine. It's a little pitch for that. But you'll see here that the concept that I'm really going for is this idea of gliding, exploring these multiple dimensions and going through them effortlessly. So to take a quick step back, how does ChatGPT work? I'm not going to talk about the machine learning and all these kinds of net types of things and the completions. I just want to point out, some people warned me when I started playing with ChatGPT, oh, you got to be careful. Sometimes it just makes things up. And that's covered in the press a lot, this idea of hallucinations, and sometimes it'll make things up. But what I want to say to people who say that is that's literally all it ever does. All it does is make things up. It's not going and finding content and giving it to you. It's just creating content all the time. I like to think of it as a little wind-up robot that just walks along and leaves behind text. That's literally all it ever does. It's just an automated text generator. It's the fanciest, most powerful automated text generator ever created by humans. I would say it's the most powerful tool ever created by humans. And it's been trained to generate text in kind of rational linguistic ways. But again, every word it generates is generated afresh. So I believe that actually so nowadays I do work in human factors engineering. And in that world, we talk a lot about the mental model of the users. And so we as humans have spent many years in the world of search engines. So we see a search bar like in Google and we type something in and we search it. It's very different in the world of ChatGPT. Over there, it's not a search engine. It never gives you results from the web. And so you have to kind of have a different mental model for what it is. And that's kind of where my whole glider thing comes in. So the idea here is that it's more like a spaceship, a glider that can take you through any space you wish. If you're interested in biology, you can explore that space. If you're interested in robots, materials, whatever you're interested in, I'll show you some examples a bit later on some of the ways you can glide through different spaces. I did want to point out that it does have a memory. So for those of you who I'm sure you've all used ChatGPT quite a bit, but you should know that it has multiple chats and each chat has a memory of whatever has been said in that chat. It's like you're gliding through a space and, oh, let's go down dinosaur space. And anything you ever want to talk about regarding dinosaurs, you should keep in that one chat because you're slowly enriching. I mean, again, it's sort of weirdly like a human. You're enriching, you're priming its knowledge, you're explaining it, little nuances in that space. If now you want to talk about financial advice, or you wanted to review a new loan application you have or something, that you should not put in your dinosaurs channel, right? That you should put in your finances channel. If you're developing a new class or you have a research project, those should have probably their own channels as well. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. But yeah, let's go back to the idea of using it as a glider to explore spaces. We already saw sort of the concept of exploring mug space. I've shown you images. I asked it to generate an image of transversal gliders going through mug spaces, and it shows different materials, sizes, shapes, and things like that. That's kind of at an abstract level what you're doing when you're exploring mug space. But more specifically, let's say you did want to use ChatGPT to explore mug space. I just did this one last night for fun. So let's say tell it, I want to find a perfect mug for a 4-year-old girl who loves princesses, dinosaurs, and strawberries. Can you give me some possibilities? And there you go. This is the latest version of ChatGPT, version 4, the paid version. You can actually have it generate images as well. So it generated this, and you can see there's a lot of good little possible images for areas you might want to further glide into. You could, for instance, show this image to your clients and say, what do you think? Which one looks good to you? And they can say, well, I really like this one up here on the shelf. That looks really nice. And then you could ask ChatGPT, give me 20 variants of that mug. That's the way you should kind of be thinking about ChatGPT as a tool to help you explore, further refine, and dive into different areas of exploration. I did want to point out that it is a statistically probabilistic engine. So if you ask it the same question over and over again, it may very well give you different responses, unless it's a factual question, but even there, it'll make things up occasionally. So you could actually use that to your advantage. So if you're trying to get a perfect mug for a 4-year-old girl, blah, 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 you don't want to say, show me a perfect mug. You want to say, show me 50 variants or 50 possible perfect mugs, because it'll never get it right. But that's where the human stays in the loop. You as the human are going to have to look at what it's giving you and say, oh, that's rubbish. We've tried that before. That particular device failed epically. You can look at it and say, okay, let's stick with this. And you can dive a little bit further or deeper down a particular path. So that's kind of broadly the metaphor that I'm going with, is this idea of a transversal glider. And so the key to getting good results is to put that little glider at the right point in space, in whatever dimensions you're interested in. If it's mug space, if it's material space, if it's the intersection of mugs and materials, you want to give it some kind of a heading. Before you throw your glider or launch it, you want to say, okay, I want you to write me a poem about a perfect mug, or I want you to give me a recipe for some hot chocolate that would be great in a perfect mug. All these kinds of things. You could choose whatever heading you want. And the last thing that is often overlooked a little bit is the concept of what I call winds or stars. I haven't decided which metaphor I want to go with here, but let me just explain, I'll give you a little example. So let's say I go into ChatGPT and I say, I want to design a behavior change intervention to reduce cancer rates. Give me 4 ways I might do that. But then you give me 3 examples. It'll give you a great answer for that, by the way. But when it does that, what it's kind of doing is I put this little yellow star up here. That's kind of the wind or the dimension. You're saying that you're asking it to think about behavior change and come up with interventions. It sort of knows, it has a rough representation, a kind of a vector point off in space, which is behavior change. And it knows kind of, oh, behavior change, that's that kind of stuff. So I'll dig into that and give you an answer, and it does a pretty good job. But I recommend you try to enrich your relevant dimensions first. So if you really care about behavior change interventions, if that's where you're going, you don't want to just trust its generic representation of what it thinks you mean by behavior change interventions. Instead, you want to enrich that dimension. And so instead of just jumping right into this question, you could first ask it, there are many kinds of behavior change interventions. Group all of them into 6 clusters, name each cluster, summarize it, and give a few examples within each cluster. And that's basically forced it in that one chat, remember, because it's only going to be in each chat that you're in, each one has its own memory. In that particular chat, it will now, instead of having a single rough representation of what you mean by behavior change interventions, it'll have an incredibly detailed and rich one. That's one of the little tricks that I sort of developed, or bumped into. But yeah, asking it to cluster things really forces it to dig one level deeper and look across all the different examples. So you can use that for all kinds of things. I'll show you some more examples shortly. And then once you do that, then you can ask the exact same question. It gives you much better results because you've enriched or thickened a dimension. And I think that's one reason why you'll see if you follow this kind of stuff, people often say, oh, you should tell it to pretend to be a brilliant academic or to pretend to be an author who's had 20 books published. When people are asking it to pretend, they're really just kind of encapsulating or implicitly asking it to enrich a dimension, if that makes sense. Pretend give me a weight loss plan, please. It'll give you one. You can say, pretend you're a doctor, a physician, and then give me a weight loss plan. It'll do a better job, but that's just because you've asked it to sort of highlight, enrich, and focus on those particular dimensions. So you can use it to do anything you want. You can refine something old if you have an email that you want to send, if you have an essay, project, any of these kinds of things, or do something new. I'm not going to read these out loud because I'm going to show you some examples of them. So yeah, I've used it to do all these different types of activities, but let's say you're a professor in biology, you can use it to sort of start exploring particular new areas of biology, or take 2 areas that you know of and ask it to come up with ideas. Give me 8 ideas at the intersection of this area and that area. And it'll do that. And you can say, oh, those are interesting. Idea number 4 looks particularly good. How might you do that? Tell me 7 ways I might dig into that particular intersectional area. And it'll do it. medical devices. These are just mostly to show off the cool images that ChatGPT is generating. I actually have used it to develop, and I'm now getting patents, which I don't know if that's ethical or legal, but ChatGPT has helped me design or come up with ideas for new types of medical devices that don't currently exist. And it took some while, and it had to be reduced to practice, but I mean, it's pretty amazing how effortlessly it can do that kind of stuff. So yeah, it can help you do anything. You just have to kind of glide in the right way. One of the other things I'll mention, so I mentioned multiple chats, I mentioned clustering. Another one that I think is really key to this is what I call the funnel technique. It's what I used to teach in qualitative research methods as well. If you're a student and you're trying to design some new educational program, or let's say you're a master's student, you're trying to understand how people, I don't know, purchase telephones nowadays. You don't want to just go and say, hey, how do you buy a telephone? You might want to go and grab someone on the street and start very broadly. I'm interested in your lifestyle and electronics. What are your views on electronics? Oh, that's interesting. How about for communication, right? And you kind of keep funneling down until you get to the area you're looking at. It's the exact same with ChatGPT. It'll do much better. It's kind of like that behavior change things. You don't want to just jump right into the question. It's basically like, if you could imagine going to a brilliant colleague and saying, what experiment should I do? And they'll have no idea what that means. Or, what research should I do? They'll have no idea. So you could start by saying, hey, I've been doing research in these areas and I found this kind of stuff out. That's interesting. Then I was doing some work over here. I've noticed some research in these other areas. You sort of slowly have to guide the human to the question you're asking. And it's the same with ChatGPT. If you ask it a simple, straight out question, it'll give you a very simple and often not very good response. You really have to broaden its knowledge and enrich its knowledge so it can know. So if you know that I'm asking for a new type of candy, that's great. If you want it to be some candy that is healthy, you need to tell it that. And you may want to first ask it, can you come up with, consider all the healthy snack foods that are out there, cluster them into 8 clusters, describe each one, et cetera, et cetera. You really have to build up its expertise and its knowledge. I should point out, it's basically read everything humans have ever written. And it's not quite that simple, but it almost is. It's just been forced to encapsulate it or compress it down into these billions of dimensions. It's a lot of dimensions, but when you ask it a question, it sort of will be influenced by everything it's ever read. So you need to really remind it about the stuff you're interested in. So anyway, so these are some examples. I'm not going to go through these. I'll go through one, kind of running low on time. Oh, I only literally have a minute left. So I think I should go very quickly. This is one that I've done before, but let's say a friend of mine was doing this. I had no idea what orthopedic biomechanics was. So at the top, I've sort of shown what I asked, designing a class on this. Can you summarize what it might be? And it kind of summarized it. That all seems fine. It gave me a lovely little class-by-class breakdown of all the things that might be covered in this class. Again, I don't know what this class is. It's not my field of research, but then I said, come up with 3 possible homework assignments for this class. And so it did a nice job, a case study analysis, a research paper, a lab report, and in each one it has some details. Then I said, can you please describe a semester-long applied research project? Sure, here it is. It gives me a pretty nice little semester-long research project. I then said, hey, can you create an example of an A quality paper? And it did. It'll do anything you ask it to do. It makes up data, of course. We recruited 20 participants. No idea what that means. Ooh, it had a nice effect size of less than 0.05. All of that is just made up. You have to be ready. It will, if you ask it something, it'll try to generate a response. Okay, so I'll skip over a bit of this. I want to just show you. So here's some of the other questions I did for that class. How about classroom demos I could do in that class? Guest speakers I could recruit for that class? Can you even write me an invitation to those guest speakers that I can send to them? You could read the questions I gave. It does a great job at this, eye-catching, interest-generating course description for the class. If you have trouble selling your class to students, it'll do a great job. You have to tell it, I'm trying to appeal to these students. They've taken these kinds of classes. This class will be, this. Can you write me an eye-catching course description? This one was kind of fun as well. Another useful tool. How can I convince my boss, my dean, my department chair, whatever it is, to let me offer it? What are the benefits? What are the future opportunities? Does a pretty good job there. Then I said, okay, what might their concerns be? If I did present this as an option, would they let me do this? And it has each of the likely retorts or concerns that your boss might have. And it also has a little reply to each of them. Pretty good, by the way. I think it did a nice job. What if I wanted to make this course, this class, this module, whatever it is, available to people in industry? Where could I advertise it? Can you add more details and specific opportunities? I went to the point of, can you identify LinkedIn groups that would likely contain people who would be interested in this course, and it did. And I said, can you write specific course descriptions for each of those groups that's slightly tweaked to the interests of people in that group? Did a great job. The last two I'll point out here. How can I introduce themes related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice? I recommend, you could just, the bottom bullet here, you could just take your current syllabus and say, hey, give me 12 suggestions for small modifications that I could do to make it better, and suggest some ways I could introduce themes of diversity, equity. I like that one because it means you don't have to redo your whole class from scratch. It'll just offer you a couple of little pointers for how to make things better. All right, so I definitely won't have time for this, but in this case, I told it about a data set. I asked it to give me some approaches to how I could use the data set to do predictive maintenance. I then said, 3, 4, and 5 are pretty good. How could I analyze data in those ways? There's that, and it did, here are 4 ways you could do it: wavelet-based, autoencoder-based. I said, okay, tell me more about that ensemble learning. That sounds pretty good. It did. It told me about different ways I could do that. I said, okay, what's this wavelet approach? What libraries, methods, platforms could I use? And it says PyWavelets, these, and then all the way down to okay, give me the MATLAB code that could actually do that technique. And I think that's a nice example of sort of this continuous glide. You get deeper and deeper into an area, all the way down to the point of this. You could try that MATLAB script. It probably would work. It has lots of blanks and things that you need to fill in. All right. Oh, and then this is the bottom green points. If I did want to do that, can you suggest possible funding sources? I've done this and it's gone down like NIH paths or whatever, NSF. Can you draft an outline? I really better wrap up now. Ooh, I'm way over. Okay, so my point about all this is also, you'll see that there is this whole world of prompt engineering out there where they give all these tips. I think you don't really need any of those tips. I mean, I like the idea of the pearls of wisdom, but I think there is a danger of people going on this very rote way of interacting, and it feels almost like telling a human how should you interact in social situations? Well, if the person says this, then you should say that. If they do this, but if you understand how a human works, and if you understand how ChatGPT works, you don't really need all these very specific examples. Just remember, it's trying to extrapolate and help you get to where you're trying to go. So here's my final little bullet points, and mostly I'm just putting in here so they'll be in the recording if anyone wants to go back and look at them. I'll point out one. I've already mentioned most of this one's an interesting one. This works quite well. Someone found this out just a couple of weeks ago, that if you ask it to pause, take a deep breath, and then respond, it does better than if you don't. So no one knows why that is, but I think in some sense it makes sense to me. So I've started introducing these long kind of instructions for doing those kinds of things. And I will point out, more complex and deep questions will give richer answers. Some of the responses I've gotten, it'll take it like 45 seconds to really think about. I ask pretty complicated questions and I use weird words. I'll throw in esoteric words occasionally just to kind of kick it into a slightly different space. All right. So yes, design is navigating these spaces, billions of dimensions. Transversal design is just navigating those spaces. And by gliding with ChatGPT, you can do some incredible stuff. And that is the end. I'm sorry I ran over a bit. Thanks.